More and more we're seeing that behavioral economics have an impact on how people invest their money and save for retirement. Studies show savings choices and decisions made in everyday spending are just as important as the investment decisions that you make. This afternoon we are pleased to welcome Dr. Daniel Crosby to the stage to speak on these very topics. Dr. Crosby is a behavioral finance expert, consultant, and president of Inkblot Behavioral Finance, a company whose mission is to improve measurable investment outcomes by improving lives. Dr. Crosby's ideas have been featured in the Huffington Post and Risk Management magazines, and he has been chosen by Monster.com as one of the 12 thinkers to watch in the world of organizational psychology. Dr. Crosby's book, You're Not That Great, applies elements of behavioral finance to the pursuit of a meaningful life. He is a two-time TEDx presenter and was recently named one of AARP's financial bloggers you should be reading. Here to discuss the three pillars of financial decision-making: simplicity, safety, and surety, please join me in welcoming Dr. Daniel Crosby.
Thanks so much. Good afternoon, everyone. That wasn't a rhetorical good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm coming to you today from the center of taste, culture, and sophistication known as Alabama. And before we get started with my formal remarks, I want to preach, because that's what we do in Alabama, is we preach. I want to preach and second what was brought up this morning by the deputy mayor. Detroit is one of my absolute favorite cities in America. Everyone is incredulous when I tell them that, but there is so much heart and love and spirit here. I want us, all of us, even if we're not Detroiters, I want us to all commit going forward as we leave this room and as we leave this conference to take upon ourselves the mantle that was set forth today, to be part of the change, to be part of the positivity, and part of the speaking confidently and positively about the future of Detroit. So you promise you'll do that with me? Thank you. Perception drives reality. If we talk about Detroit like the wonderful place it is, it'll become that place. So now that I've rallied and inspired you, let me be a downer. From 1400 to the early 1900s, a single disease killed millions of people. Now, while this is tragic, it's not wholly unprecedented in the history of humanity. What is unprecedented about this disease in particular is that a simple, cost-effective, widely known cure was discovered for it again and again and again on numerous continents. In the 1400s, Vasco da Gama and his men discovered a cure for this, that if they ate adequate fresh produce, they would be cured of this disease. In the 1500s, Jacques Cartier, the Canadian explorer, found that when native Canadians boiled him a pine nettle tea, he and his men were cured of this disease. Flash forward to a man named James Lind, who wrote 3 treatises, large books, on the cure of this disease, all to have them roundly ignored. And it's not until 1932 when an American doctor named Charles Glenn King discovers vitamin C that we figured out how to cure scurvy. So why were we not able to cure scurvy? We had found the cure as early as the early 1400s. So why does it take 500 years, millions of lives, and really major stuff? Like scurvy was crippling armadas. It had everything to do with how nations were living and dying and who was winning wars. Why is it that we could not cure scurvy? The answer is that each time someone set forth the answer to this huge and crippling problem, they were laughed at because it was thought of as being too simple. The answer to curing scurvy can surely not be lemons. Surely it is not having a teaspoon of lime juice every day. That's not how you cure a debilitating disease. And yet there it was, and no one had eyes to see it. A similar thing is afoot today in the world of finance and retirement savings. That something simple yet profound is driving our inability or ability to prepare and be ready for retirement, and that thing is psychology or behavior. I want you to consider the following. I had a great interaction with someone who will remain unnamed yesterday who said, "Do you mind if I ask you a question? You just don't seem like the typical keynote speaker." Okay? Now, I never figured out exactly what this meant. Maybe it meant you're young. Maybe it means shave already. Maybe it means, why did we hire someone from Alabama? But whatever it means, why do you have a shrink coming to talk to you at lunch during a retirement conference, right? Why is it? The reason is this. The reason is this, that over the last 30 years, the gap between the returns that the stock market has given us and the returns realized by the average equity investor is 530 basis point gap, 5.3% gap between what the market, just buying index funds and doing nothing, has given you and what we have gotten. Now this is largely due to our own bad behavior. The market sentiment that was talked about earlier by the CIO, where we get in and get out at all the wrong times, we buy and sell at the wrong times, we buy the wrong stuff, we get excited about Facebook and Alibaba and all these things, right? So some of you are going to say to me, this doesn't have much to do with my day-to-day because I'm invested through MERS and they have this great DB program for me and it's very sensible and you're very lucky to have that. But we need to talk about retirement readiness as a three-legged stool. One of the legs of that stool is Social Security, knock on wood, right? Hopefully the aliens don't come and take our Social Security away, right? The second leg of that is what we're all here for today, what MERS is providing you with. But the third leg of that needs to still be personal savings and personal investments. You need to have each leg of this three-legged stool. So if it doesn't apply to one piece, I promise you that it applies to another. Something else, I want to point you to the second statistic. During the years of the Great Recession, people with access to a financial coach, a financial planner, or a financial advisor did 2.92% better per year than those with no such access. You are all very lucky here in that you have these pizza and planning sessions. You have people like Dave who will come around and educate you. You have all of these resources. You have the hotline to call. All of these resources to educate yourself. But what is it that really moves the needle about this education? Because 3% a year is killer. I mean, 3% a year is the difference between ready for retirement and not ready for retirement over a lifetime. When Aon Hewitt, who commissioned this study, drilled down on this 3% net of fees, they found that it wasn't tax advice, it wasn't stock picking, it was none of the meat and potatoes blocking and tackling, it was hand holding. It was keeping you from doing 3 or 4 stupid things over your life is what makes 3% a year difference in your investment returns. Which is why now 77% of financial professionals that I surveyed are talking to their clients about behavioral finance, which is what I study, which is the intersection of mind and markets. But behavioral finance has some pretty significant shortfalls historically. I talked to some of you last night who have read great books by Daniel Kahneman, Dan Ariely, and other thought leaders in my field. But despite the great work that they and others have done, it's been a little bit short so far. There hasn't been much theory, it hasn't been very comprehensive, and instead it is mostly revolved around what you see on the screen, which is lists of biases and irrationalities. You see, traditional economics thinks that you and I are rational decision makers, but we know better. Because I saw some of you last night at the bar, right? We know better than this. We're not rational. But how irrational are we? Well, the good shrinks of the world have gone to the trouble of coming up with and cataloging, you'll be pleased to know, 117 different stupid things that you can do to sink your ability to retire. There's 117 different ways to screw it up, and I'm going to list them all out over the next 40 minutes. So sit back. No. This isn't helpful. It's not helpful for me to sit here and berate you and belittle you and tell you all the ways that you can get it wrong. So I am going to take a different approach. But first I want us to sort of experience this. It's a little light. So it's a little light. If you can't read this, let me read it to you. And be calm. I want you to raise your hand when you know the answer. Nobody shout it out. So it says, there's a patch of lily pads in a lake. Each day the patch doubles in size. If it takes 48 days for the patch to cover the lake, how long would it take to cover half the lake? Raise your hand when you got it. Sir, what's your name? Steve, can you stand up? This will teach you to sit in the front row. You kiss up. Go ahead.
47.
Steve says it's 47. Who thinks Steve is right? Round of applause if you think Steve's right. Who thinks Steve's wrong? Raise your hand if you think Steve's wrong. All right, this gentleman, what's your name?
Todd.
What? Todd. Awesome. Okay, he's right. Todd's wrong. But Todd, I got some good news for you, bro. I got some good news for you. So sit back, and I got some bad news for Steve. Here's the good news, bad news situation for Steve and Todd. The good news is that Steve's right. It does take 47 days. The bad news is that the smartest people in the world tend to get this wrong. So we got a genius in our midst right here with Todd. Very good. The smartest people tend to get this wrong because the smartest people, like Todd, tend to be very good at life. People like Todd are just good at life. They just get it. They coast through life. They breeze through. They're good at everything. So they're overconfident. They skip the math. They just shoot straight to an answer. Oftentimes the answer is 24 is the answer that folks will come up with. Okay? So being smart is not enough to be good with money. Being smart's not enough because this is what happens. Not to Todd. Todd's above all this. But to the rest of us, studies show that we lose 13% of our IQ under duress. So you're going to sit here today for 45 or 50 minutes. I'm going to fill your brain full of good stuff, and you're going to check your iPhone at the break and see that the market's down 1.5%, which it is, and you're going to freak out and you're going to forget everything that I said. Because we lose 13% of our smarts when we get stressed out. So what do we have to do? We have to do what 90% of financial advisors are advocating now, which is we need to bake behavioral finance into the process. And you guys are already off to a fantastic start today because the little tool with the red flag and the green flags and the suggestions that was introduced today is absolutely what you need to be doing. It needs to be baked into the process. It needs to be a part of your everyday and not just something you revisit when you're panicking and just absolutely freaking out. Okay? So let's talk about these three today because what I've done is I took the 117 different biased ways that you could deal with your money, make decisions about your money, and I looked at the psychological principles that underpin all of those 117 things. I'm from Alabama. I need simplicity, folks. I need simplicity. So I took these 117 and I broke them down into three things, which Chris mentioned before. There are three things that drive our behavior when we're dealing with money. Simplicity. The Fed releases 45,000 pieces of economic data each month. What are you supposed to do with that? There are multiple cable channels that try and tell you at all hours of night and day how you should be investing your money, what you should be doing now, what you should be worrying about, or what you should be not worrying about. What are you supposed to do with this glut of information? We must necessarily simplify our financial lives. The next is that we want safety. It's a very natural thing for us to want safety. I recently spoke to a group of hedge fund managers in the Bahamas. Tough life, okay? So I spoke to a group of hedge fund managers in the Bahamas. Everyone in that room, save myself, is a multimillionaire. I'm talking to some of the guys there. I had brought my family, and so I was not doing anything. I was not doing any gambling, right? A bunch of the guys had been out gambling the night before, and I talked to them, and they say, "How'd you do?" One of these multimillionaires was up $800. I say to him, "You got to be feeling good. You're up $800." He goes, "Doesn't change my life," right? One of these other multimillionaires is down $500. I say, "Oh, how you feeling?" "Oh, I'm down $500. "Oh, how you doing with that?" "This trip's ruined. I don't know why I even came. This is expletive deleted," so on and so forth, right? Why did he have this reaction? He had this reaction because behavioral economists have shown us time and time again that we hate losses more than twice as much as we appreciate or enjoy comparably sized gains. We're loss averse. We get really upset about losses, and we're not all that super happy about gains. So because of this asymmetry in the way that we think about the world, we want to be safe. And then the final S is we want surety. We want to sleep well at night. We want to think that what we're doing is the right thing. So all of these three things can be had in two types of ways, though. There's positive and negative ways to achieve all of these three pillars. And if left to our own devices, a lot of times we naturally navigate to the maladaptive or bad way to go about seeking these three things. So we're going to talk about each of them in turn, and we're going to tell you how you can get these three S's, simplicity, safety, and surety, in the right way, in a way that's going to help you prepare for retirement. So the first thing that we do in simplifying our financial lives is that we frame them. And to show you what I mean by framing, I want to give you the following real-world example. Let's say I walk into my local Starbucks, and they know me well because I go there to do work. And I walk in one day, and they say, "Hey, Dr. Crosby, we've got this new super mochaccino delight, and we know you've been trying to run and watch what you eat, so it's 92% fat-free. We got it just for you, man." And I say, "Thank you so much, I'll take one." I come in the next day, and they have a new hire who hasn't been fully brainwashed into the ways of the Starbucks, right? And so she, innocently enough, says, "Hey there, mister. Thanks for coming to Starbucks. We have a new drink here today." And I say, "Well, is it healthy?" She says, "Well, it's 8% full of fat," right? Do I do it? I certainly do not. I go, "Ugh, disgusting. I want that mochaccino thing I had yesterday that was 92% fat-free," right? Okay. Right. So it's silly, but we all do this. And study after study shows that if you ask people, could you live on 80% of your income? Almost everyone says, yeah, I could live on 80% of my income, because it's framed positively. It's framed as a big number. But if you ask those same people, could you ever save 20% of your income? They go, "Oh, no, I could never. I could never save 20% of my income." So we need to be careful about how we think about and frame retirement savings. We need to frame retirement savings as the positive endeavor that it really is. An endeavor that feeds a future self, feeds and clothes and entertains a future self that has all of the same needs that your right now self has. This isn't a painful drudgery process, right? That's just painful in the moment. We need to frame it and talk about it as something that we look forward to, and something that is an investment in the future, not a pain in the butt today, right? It's going to help us reorient our mindset. So the next thing that I want to talk about, I want you to raise your hand if you have an insurance policy. Raise your hand if you have any kind of insurance policy. Okay? Keep your hand. Come on. You just ate. I want you to keep your hand up if in the last month you have gambled or purchased a lottery ticket. This is a no judgment zone. This is a no judgment zone. Many of you have bought a lottery ticket or gambled in the last month. You can put it down. It doesn't help that the casino's right across the river, right? Traditional economists say that second group that had their hand up do not exist. Okay, you do not exist. You're like the aliens that are stealing our retirement. You do not exist because they say that people should have a single static risk tolerance. You've got a high, low, or medium level of risk, and buying an insurance policy is suggestive of a low level of risk tolerance, and buying a lottery ticket is suggestive of a very risky sort of endeavor, a risky way to spend your money. So why is it that people like me and you and everyone you know buy lottery tickets and insurance in the same day sometimes? It's because of the way that we frame our financial decisions. We frame insurance as a hedge against low levels of wealth and living on the street. And we frame lottery ticket purchases as a shot at the big time. We don't necessarily expect them to pay off, but we have a piece of us that's hoping that they do. And as Chris pointed out, for some of us, that's our entire retirement plan, right? So let's harken back now to your Psych 100 class, where you learned about Abraham Maslow, and you learned about Maslow's hierarchy. And you learned things that, like, until you have enough water and food and a roof over your head, you can't worry about friendship or love or God or the meaning of life, right? You gotta kind of get the necessities of life squared away before you can move on to sort of the higher order things that make life rich and worth living, I would say. The same thing is afoot in our financial lives. Gandhi said, "To a poor man, bread is God." That's all they can think about. That's their everything. And I want to say to you, to a poor man, food and shelter and clothing and getting the adequate risk are God, right? Because until we have enough money to take care of our basics, we're always going to be worried. We're always going to be worried, and am I going to end up on the street? Am I going to be a bag lady? Am I going to eat cat food? Like all these things that I hear. So one of the things that I help people do, and that good financial planners help people do, is to frame and sort of stratify the different goals they have in their life. To help people understand what's the number that I need to hit to make sure that I'm going to have enough to eat for the rest of my life. Let's hit that conservatively. Let's make sure that we can do that, right? Once we move on from there, it then becomes a little bit easier to take more appropriate risks with your money. Now, this can be, some people would say you should actually invest this way. Some people would say that's a bad idea, and you should just talk about it that way. But whatever the case, psychologists like me will tell you that this is how you think about your money, that you partition it out into different buckets, and that you spend those buckets differently based on how you've mentally accounted for them. If your grandma, who worked all her life at a minimum wage job, leaves you $50,000, I promise you, you spend that money differently than $50,000 you win at Harrah's across the road, right? You just account for it differently and you spend it differently. So what I'm advocating here is to take hold of and to take ownership of these different mental accounts in your life and move your money or think about your money in ways that help you make the best decisions. So if I could get a couple of volunteers, this time I'm going to be nicer than I was to Steve and Todd. I'm going to tell you what I'm asking for. I want you to tell me what's the best and worst financial decision you've ever made. Anybody willing to say that? What's the best and worst financial decision you ever made? Ma'am. Deferred compensation when you were young is the best? Best. Anyone got a good worst? Sir. What? I don't even know what you said. Jet boat. Oh, jet boat. Okay, jet boat. Yes, right. Always drive your neighbor's boat, right? This is the caveat. This is the caveat. So one of my clients, who will remain nameless, one of my clients thought it would be a great idea to take this thin-skinned boy from Alabama on an 8-degree day and stick him in Times Square with a videographer and a microphone and have me chase down people and ask them, ma'am, sir, excuse me, what's the best and the worst financial decision you've ever made? So the only thing colder than that New York morning were the hearts of the New Yorkers themselves, right? This would never have happened in Michigan. But I'd like to thank the good people of Eastern Europe and Australia for answering my questions. And I talked to about 40 people that day. And to a person, every single one of them had the same response. And this is in 2011. Every single one of them said purchasing a house was the best decision they had ever made. And every single one of them said being invested in the stock market is the worst decision I've ever made. Okay? So let's look at how true this is, true or false this is, and see what sort of psychological traps might account for this thinking. So Robert Shiller of Yale University, heard of it, who recently won a Nobel Prize, had this to say in his research. He found that for middle-class Americans have roughly 2/3 of their wealth embedded within their home. It's wrapped up in their home. Not good, right? He also found that when he interviewed these middle-class Americans, people like all of us here today, he found that their expected gain on this home was 13% per annum. 13% a year is what they expected to get on their house. When he broke this down, though, and accounted for purchasing power, which has gotten some good press today, purchasing power when they strip out inflation, he found that the average American home had appreciated 6% total over 100 years when adjusted for inflation. And the only markets where there had been real significant growth were places like Boston and New York, right? So, why is it that we so cherish our homes? What lesson can we learn about this mistaken problem that we have here? He calls this the money illusion, which is that people tend to think about money in terms of numbers. They think in nominal terms, in number terms, and not in terms of what that money will buy. So we have to be ever vigilant for accounting for inflation. And one of the wonderful things that the CIO and the actuary and others talked about were this is your bogey. You're trying to stay 3.5% above inflation so that you maintain that purchasing power. Because homes are precious to us. We bring our kids home in a home, we take prom pictures, we do all these things in a home, but because they have sentimental value to us, we overvalue them. And the second reason that we overvalue them is because we know that grandma bought her home in DC for $75,000 in 1947, and that she sold it last year for $750,000. So grandma got a 10-bagger on her home, right? No. There's the opportunity cost and there's inflation that we have to account for. So this is another way that we simplify that's problematic. So again, to close out this section, we simplify by engaging in mental accounting and thinking in nominal terms. But this can be damaging to us. So instead, we need to simplify by taking back these mental accounts, by framing things the way that we need them to be framed to ensure that they get spent the way we need to spend them. I value education greatly. I went to a lot of school. And I value education for my kids. And so I have earmarked college funds for my kids that are well funded, and I just will not touch that money. I could. There's nothing holding me back from touching that money. It's all fungible, right? I could touch that money just as surely as I could anything else, but I won't because I labeled it in a meaningful way. And then finally, we need to learn to think in terms of what our money gets and tie it to the goals we have for our retirement so we naturally think in terms of purchasing power. The second pillar that I want to talk about is this idea of safety, or that we all want to feel safe. And one of the primary ways that we gain safety is the following. Raise your hand if you stayed in the hotel last night. Pretty much everyone stayed in the hotel last night, right? You probably saw something by your towel, a little placard that said something like this: "The Marriott cares so deeply about the environment. We love the earth so much. Please help us by recycling your towels." Okay? Maybe you're a little cynical about that request like I am. The Marriott makes this request probably partially because they love the earth, but also because it saves them a lot of money on detergents and cleaning services, right? When they make a simple request like this, 38% of people comply. Pretty low number. They can add one sentence to that and bump compliance to nearly 60%. And that sentence is, "Please join your fellow guests in our reuse and recycle program." In the first condition, if you're not recycling, okay, you're on your own, you're not recycling. In the second condition, everyone else loves the earth and you are a scumbag. And you are in the lowest quartile of people who hate Mother Earth, right? So you have been positioned relative to a crowd, and that massively influences our behavior. We are herd creatures. Our brain takes up 20% of our caloric intake, right? Next time you need to go on a diet, just think harder. Your brain uses up 20% of your calories. Not sure what that says about myself, but we're going to move on from that. We are always looking for ways to make our thinking and our cognition a simpler process. And one of the easiest ways we can make that process simpler is by coasting off of the opinions and the decisions of others. And this works marvelously well in many situations. When I go to a new city, when I'm here last night, I jump on my phone, I look at Urban Spoon, which aggregates restaurant reviews, and I find a place with a good score, and I go there, and it's always good, right? Because this is a good way to save decision making. But is it a good way to make financial decisions? It is not. One of the things that was talked about earlier is how moods drive markets. And one of the greatest things that you can look at is equity inflows versus performance. It is almost an article of faith that when people are piling into the stock market, it is time for you to get the hell out because it is going to crash, right? This is the way that things go. We see one of the biggest equity inflows of all time was in January of 2000, and we know what comes next, right? There are lots of ways that you can coast off the decisions of other people, deciding how to invest your money, whether or not to save, the rate at which you should defer. All of these things are things not best left to the decisions of your barber or your neighbor. The next way that we go about seeking safety, so the first way that we seek safety is by following the herd. The second way that we seek safety is by getting extremely conservative with our money. So cash, treasuries, these sorts of things. I travel a ton for my work, and I was recently in Omaha, Nebraska, doing what you should do in Omaha, Nebraska, which is eat a big bloody steak. So I'm eating this big bloody steak, and I finish up, and I'm waiting at the bar for my cab. And I'm a southern guy. I chat up strangers in the grocery line and at big bloody steak houses. And so I talk to this guy at the bar, and I'm like, "Hey, sir, what do you do? Where are you from?" And he's a little annoyed, but I got 20 minutes, so... So I'm talking to him, and so he's like, "Okay, let's do this." And he asked me, "Okay, well, what do you do?" And I tell him that I'm a psychologist for the financial services industry, and this poor guy just died. Like, this was the most bogus job this guy had. This was the most bogus job. And so he goes into this sort of diatribe about crooks and thieves, and it's all rigged, and it's terrible. And I said, "Well, sir, this is a nice restaurant. Like, this is a $50 steak or whatever. You're doing all right to be eating here. So what do you do with your money?" He was a farmer. He was a wealthy farmer. And he says to me, "Honest to goodness, sir, I've got my money buried at my house." He said, "I got $250,000 back at my house in jars and glasses and mattresses, and it's buried there because I know Wall Street's a pyramid scheme, and I want no part of it. So I leaned in and I said, tell me more. And then I followed him home and I killed him. And So no, this farmer did what many of us do, I think. I didn't kill him. If it had been 500, for sure. But this farmer did what many of us do, I think, which is get scared. We want safety, and so we do something that we perceive as extremely safe. In his case, have mattresses full of bills, okay? So I tried to preach to this guy, as I want to do. I tried to preach to this guy about, inflation risk and, what if a tornado comes and all these sorts of things, and he was not having it, and then I left. But we fail to account for, once again, inflation. So oftentimes in our best efforts to manage risk, we bring an immense amount of risk upon ourselves. We're trying to manage risk, we're trying to do what we ought to do, but we miss market rallies because we're trying to get cute and time the market. Or we put it all in such a conservative place that we don't make enough to meet our goals. There's nothing safe about a guaranteed 2 to 3% loss in cash that you're just sitting on over long periods of time. And then the final thing that I want to talk about is how we listen to our gut. So let's talk a little bit about the brain here and get a little bit, a very basic description of the brain. The oldest and most primitive part of your brain is what's referred to sort of colloquially as the reptilian part of your brain. And when you get stressed out, this is where you start. This is where your decision making starts, is in this instinctual reptilian sort of fight or flight mode. If you can get past that, you then start to make emotional decisions with your limbic system. So then the emotions take over. Still not a good way to make financial decisions. It's only if you have a plan in place to break yourself free of the orbit of the first two that we get here to the neocortex, the newest and most advanced part of our brain, where we're really able to make some well thought out decisions. So what do you have to do? You need two things. The first thing you need is a pre-commitment. You need to commit to somebody that you are going to do X in terms of great periods of financial fear or greed. I love baseball. I've been to at least 10 Tigers games, and I was bummed I missed the one yesterday. But the thing, I was at a Braves game the other day, and they were asking people to sign a pact that they would not drink and drive. Okay? This thing has no teeth whatsoever. This is not a legal thing. Like, it's not like you're in extra trouble if you get a DUI and you sign, but you promised, right? I mean, this is strictly a psychological mechanism, and it works. The research shows that it works, it works, it works. You need to commit with somebody, whoever it is that's coaching you on how to prepare for retirement. You need to commit now, while you're still sane, to do X when things get hairy, right? You need to commit now. And the second thing you need to do is you need to have an emergency plan. You need to have an emergency plan. You need to have that person you can call. You need to have that person that can talk you down off the ledge. You need to have that relationship resource so that when things get scary, you have someone who you can talk to. Now, I study this stuff all day, and I still do it. My dad is a financial advisor, and I have to call him, and he goes, remember your plan, stick to your knitting. I mean, he has to talk me off the ledge all the time, and I study these things for a living. So you've got to be pre-committed, and you've got to have that person you can call. The other thing you've got to do is you've got to realize that you're playing your own game. You're fighting your own war. One of the most detrimental things that people do is that they fail to fight their own war. They want to fight a war with their neighbors, or they want to fight a war with the benchmark or something else. They want to outperform something that has nothing to do with their life, nothing to do with their goals, nothing to do with their needs or their risk appetites. I talked to someone, a gentleman named Terry, after my previous panel in there. And Terry and I were discussing what is known in the psychological literature as hedonic treadmill, and what Terry and I referred to as always buying more crap, right? Why is it that over the course of your life, you just get spendier and spendier, and you spend up to your salary, and you get a raise, and you spend up to that? A lot of times it's because we're benchmarking to wanting to be impressive, to wanting to outdo the Joneses, or to want to beat some sort of external benchmark. We need our own benchmark that tells us the kind of life we need to live, the kind of returns we need, and the kind of savings we need in place to live our own best life. So as we close out this section, we seek safety if left to our own devices by looking to our friends, neighbors, or someone on TV. What we really need to do is to lead with our personal goals. And we also need to have this plan in place so that when things get tough, we are pre-committed and we have someone safe we can call to have them talk us down off the ledge. The final pillar here is surety, which is the confidence that we need to sleep at night. Now, so I've given this presentation before at other conferences, and their compliance wanted me to take off the picture of the man I'm about to talk about, but I have received no such instruction here, so it's Jim Cramer. This is who we're talking about, is Jim Cramer, okay? Jim Cramer of Mad Money fame is one of the most known and listened to financial talking heads that there is. Jim Cramer has 6-figure viewership each night, so surely Jim Cramer is a smart dude who you should listen to and follow his advice. Jim Cramer told you to buy Bear Stearns the day before it went bankrupt. Jim Cramer underperformed the market by 10% from 05 to 07 and 5% during the Great Recession. Jim Cramer is so bad that a hedge fund has now emerged whose sole strategy is selling short his picks 2 to 3 days after he makes them, okay? If you don't know what short selling is, they're betting against him. If he says buy Apple, they're shorting it, they're selling against it, right? This is how bad he is. So why do hundreds of thousands of people tune into Jim Cramer every night if he's no good? What's his shtick? What's he like? Yell it out. He's loud, right? He's loud. He's aggressive. He hits buttons. He throws plush toys at the screen. He's the picture of confidence. And confidence does something to our brains. Confidence actually shuts down the part of our brain, listening to experts rather, shuts down the part of our brain associated with critical thinking. When we tune in to the Jim Cramers of the world, and he's by no means the only one, he's just the most flamboyant, right? When we tune into the Jim Cramers of the world, our critical thinking goes to sleep. But he makes us feel confident. So in place of Jim Cramer, you need someone else. A coach at MERS, the pizza and planning session, a financial advisor, whatever it is, you need your own personal expert to help you feel confident, to help you feel sure, and one that's not going to throw a plush toy at you, okay? Now, the average human attention span is 12 minutes, and you have been sitting down for some great multiple of that at this point. So I'd like you to all stand up, please. All right, so this is going to get tricky. Let's see how you can listen and follow instructions. Okay, so one of the things that I loved about the World Cup is how America actually gave a darn about soccer, if only for a minute, right? If only for a couple of weeks. We really kind of cared there for a minute. So we're going to try and play a little soccer here. And you're the goalie. You guys are super intimidating right now, by the way. I'm just backing up. You're the goalie, and I'm driving at you. I'm dribbling the ball towards you, and I'm on a breakaway, and I'm going to try and score, okay? So I'm rearing back, as we say in Bama. I'm rearing back, and I'm about to kick the ball, and you've got to make a decision, and you've got 3 options. You can dive left, you're left. You can dive right, or you can stay centered, okay? I'm coming, and on the count of 3, I want you to physically do what you commit to doing. I know it's silly. 1, 2, 3. Oh, MERS. Very good. Have a seat. Have a seat. Okay, so raise your hand if you dove left. Who dove left? Who dove right? Who stayed still? Okay, you smart Alex. If you stayed still, was it out of a genuine commitment to stillness, or were you just didn't want to look dorky? But tell me. So standing still was the right answer. So they did this great study on what's called action bias. Action bias is when things get really intense, we have this idea that like we need to hurry up and do something. Because by golly, even if we lose this soccer game, we're going to lose with me doing the most insane and dramatic leap that just shows I put my all into it, right? We're going to go down swinging. But yet, in investing and in soccer, this is a bad idea. So 94% of the time, the goalie dove left or right. They had an action bias. They wanted to do something. They didn't want to look like a dummy frozen in the middle of the goal, right? And yet, when they froze in the middle of the goal and did nothing, they stopped a great deal more shots. You tell goalies this, and they still dive, right? Because they don't want to look dumb when the game is on the line. Something similar is afoot in investing, right? All too often, we find that when things get really exciting, right? We've either got to cash it all in and bet it all on pets.com, or we've got to really just, go stuff it in our mattress in Nebraska. We want to do something, though. We don't want to get caught with our pants down when things get bad or when things are really good. And we see this action bias present in the way that markets work these days. In the 50s, the average holding period for a U.S. equity was 6 years. In the early aughts, it was 6 months. And until recently, volume has continued to just get faster and faster, or more and more volume, rather. This is because more information gives us the illusion of control. One of the things that we do to seek surety, to seek confidence, is that we immerse ourselves in the news. We want to know about Chinese coffee futures, or we want to know what the guy who predicted the last recession has to say about this. Whatever it is, we're digging in there and we want to know all about it. But the research says again and again that the more active you are with your money, the more you move it around, the worse you do. And they also find that there is an inverse relationship between consuming financial media and making money. Okay? So let me reiterate that. You should do nothing. The more you learn about this stuff, the dumber you get. The dumber you get, the more you learn, right? It's a little counterintuitive. So, as we begin to wrap up this talk of surety or confidence, you know that when you get a shrink to come talk to you, there's going to be a kumbaya moment. And this is that kumbaya moment. So I'm not going to out anybody today, but I want you to think for a minute during this kumbaya moment of what matters most to you. What matters most to you in the world. If I had to throw up a picture of what mattered most to me, you'd see a picture of a beautiful little 5-year-old girl and a handsome little 10-month-old dude, which are the reasons that I go all over the country to try and send those kids to a good school, right? They are what matters most to me. And you have something in your life that matters to you. And I can promise you that whatever that most important thing is, it exists along a continuum of years or maybe even decades. It's a long-term thing. It's not something that's probably make or break in the next 5 minutes. And yet, we make financial decisions on a minute-to-minute, hair-trigger basis that impact our forever. Now, I talked before about how learning more about financial markets can actually lead to worse performance. And on the whole, the world of investing and money management and financial decision-making is a topsy-turvy world, right? And here's another example. If I asked any of you what you were going to be doing in 10 minutes, you could tell me. If I asked any of you what you're going to be doing in 10 years, you'd look at me like I was crazy. And yet, in the world of finance, it works almost the opposite of that. Try and figure out what's going on tomorrow, you really have no idea. And anyone who tells you different is trying to sell you something. But if we stretch out our horizon, if we align our gaze with our goals, we start to make much better decisions. We start to make much better decisions, to the point that a big advisory firm in Philadelphia started doing this. They started pegging benchmarks and reporting and everything to clients' goals. And they were doing this in 2008, but not with all of their clients. Their clients who were not taking this goals-based view, 60% of them liquidated their accounts in 2008 and then were not around to get the subsequent gains. Of those that stuck around and used this goals-based approach, though, 75% of them stayed absolutely put and drastically outperformed those who had not aligned their gaze with their goals. So pin your hopes and dreams to your financial decisions and vice versa, and let those long-term goals be the thing against which you make decisions. Because the world of money management and saving and financial decision-making gets a whole lot less scary when you pull the timetable out a little bit. And finally here I want to talk about something that's been talked about today. Chris talked about how this room, which is probably a sample that's biased towards people who are better prepared and more intelligent than most in terms of these things, this room, only about maybe 60%, 50% of us have a financial plan. And that's probably better than the national averages, it sounds like. We want to be confident. That's what all of this surety is all about. But there can be no confidence where there is no plan. The whole definition of confidence means that reality congrues with or adheres to your plan. So you can have no confidence when you have no plan. So if you don't have a financial plan yet, if you don't have that roadmap, if you do nothing else, give yourself the opportunity for definitional, real confidence by going to get that plan. So as I close out this piece, we seek surety by listening to experts. But if we want real surety, we need to have our own trusted expert. That coach or that hotline or that regional meeting or that advisor, whoever that is, someone who has our best interests in heart. Because Jim Cramer doesn't care about your retirement fund, and he's not incentivized to give a darn about your retirement fund. We also seek surety by maintaining really tight timelines, by trying to time what's going to happen in the next 10 minutes. But counterintuitively, the future is much more predictable than the present. So as we're able to align our gaze with our goals, our decisions get much, much better. So I'm going to begin to wrap up now, and I want to say in closing that these three things are powerful and that they can guide your decision making in up, down, and sideways markets and through all that you're trying to do. Simplicity, safety, and surety can be yours. But there's good ways to get them, and there's bad ways to get them. And the primary defining marker is how personalized you make it. This system applies to all of us. We all want these three S's. But the goals and the values and the personal benchmarks that each of us carry within us are what makes it unique, what allows us to tailor it to our own needs, and allows us to make better decisions. I shared a study that I just think is so powerful that I want to share in closing here earlier this morning. A bank was struggling with how to get their low-income savers to put aside an appropriate amount of money. And what they were doing is, at first, they were giving everyone free checking accounts, free savings accounts, but they were pretty much like any old checking or savings account. It said checking account 54321, right? So they tried something else. They tried to personalize it. They asked people what was meaningful to them. And they said, "What's meaningful to you, Dr. Crosby?" And I said, "Charlotte and Liam Crosby are meaningful to me." So I would make this the Charlotte and Liam Fund. And when I make it the Charlotte and Liam Fund, saving increases a great deal. But they took it one more step further to make it even more personal and even more meaningful to these people and make it a more visceral thing when they logged in. Beside that text of Charlotte and Liam Fund, they put a picture of Charlotte and Liam, or the sailboat, or the whatever it is that means a lot to you. They put a picture to make it real, that the sacrifices you're making today lead to a brighter tomorrow for these two kids or for your sailboat, right? And when they did this, savings increased 2.5 times, 250% uptick in savings when they were able to personalize it. Just like the cure for scurvy, none of this is rocket science. It's about forethought, it's about planning, it's about discipline, it's about tying all of this to the things that mean the most to you. But just like Viktor Frankl found out as he survived the horrors of World War II, he who has a why to live can bear with almost any how. So it's my hope for you that you will take your why, hold on to it, and then embed it into your money management and decision-making process, and I know that you'll be able to deal with any how. Thank you.